Hey guys, this is Jeff. I'm a children's pastor here at Journey's Crossing, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about what's going on in my mind and my heart this week. And as we were going through this week, I was preparing the kids' church content for kids at Journey's Crossing, and we were talking about a guy in the Old Testament named Joseph. Now, some of you guys who've maybe grown up in church know this Joseph guy. You know the story. Some of you who are maybe a little bit newer to Jesus say, I think I've heard that name before, but I think maybe there's a musical written about him. And for some of you, you're like, no, Joseph. I didn't know there was even a Joseph in the Bible. So let me share with you a little bit of Joseph's story and then what's been kind of running through my mind about Joseph this week. So Joseph, we find in the very first book of the Bible. That's a book called Genesis. And his story starts about Genesis 37 or so. But even before that, we meet some of Joseph's family. We know that Joseph is the great-grandson of a guy named Abraham. Abraham is an important character in the Bible. He met with God. God found favor in Abraham and promised Abraham a number of things. He made a contract or a covenant with Abraham. Told Abraham that he was going to make him the father of a huge nation, that his descendants would be as countless as the stars, that he was going to give his descendants land. He promised them land. That's where we get the term promised land from this promise that God made Abraham. And also said that the entire world one day was going to be blessed by one of Abraham's descendants. Pretty big deal, right? And then we read that Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob also went by the name Israel. Jacob becomes the father of the Israelites, the people that the whole Old Testament is written about, the people that we call Jewish people today. Jacob, or Israel, becomes the father of this whole huge group of people that are still around, tons and tons of people. We interact with Jewish people, descendants of Jacob, every day. So Joseph is one of Jacob's sons. In fact, he's one of 12 sons. He's got 11 brothers. But Jacob did not hide the fact that Joseph was his absolute bar none favorite. We're supposed to love our kids equally. Jacob didn't read that in the instruction manual. He loved Joseph and then the other 11. And as you might imagine, Joseph's brothers got a little sick of that. Jacob got Joseph a multicolored coat, something that was really showy and fancy and probably pretty expensive back in the day. Didn't give the rest of his sons that, just got one for Joseph, but the brothers didn't like that. Joseph started to have these dreams that his brothers and even his mom and dad were going to bow down to him one day. Guess what? They didn't like that either. And so the hardships of Joseph's life began. One day out in the wilderness, Jacob's sons, Joseph's brothers, attacked him and threw him in a big pit, a cistern, something used to collect rainwater out in the desert. They plotted to kill him. But then, as luck would have it, slave traders came along and they said, well, let's make some money off Joseph. So they sold him to some slave traders who carried him all the way to a faraway land called Egypt. And there they sold Joseph as a slave, as an object, as not even barely human. As luck would have it, or maybe as God would have it, Joseph was bought by a guy named Potiphar, who was very important in the Egyptian hierarchy, the political hierarchy. And Joseph excels in Potiphar's service. He becomes the master of Potiphar's whole household. But then more hardship. Potiphar's wife takes a fancy to Joseph, and he will not fool around with her, and so she tells lies on him, and it leads to him being thrown into prison. But there in prison, he excels again. He actually becomes kind of the master of the prison, second to the warden. And there are a couple of Pharaoh's officials that get thrown into prison who have some dreams, and Joseph is able to interpret those dreams. And one of them is going to go back to work for the Pharaoh, and he says, hey, tell Pharaoh about my case. I don't belong here. I've done nothing wrong. This is terrible. Remember me. And the guy says, oh, yeah, I'll remember you. But he doesn't. And so Joseph sits in prison a little longer until Pharaoh has a dream, and he needs someone to interpret that, and none of his wise men can do it. And then this guy goes, oh, hey, I forgot. There's this guy in prison who might be able to help you out. So Joseph gets brought out of prison, and he's able to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And he gives Pharaoh an idea and says, here's what I think God wants you to do about this dream that you've had. This dream is that there was a big famine coming. And Pharaoh says, that's great. I know the guy to do it. It's you. He makes Joseph the second in command of all the nation of Egypt. And Joseph becomes in charge of all the food. He, for the next 7 years, gathers up food, and so the Egyptians have a huge amount of food, almost hoarding, right? Hoards all this food for 7 years, but he knows why he's hoarding, because 7 years of famine are coming. And during those 7 years of famine, the Egyptians have food because of Joseph's actions. In fact, the surrounding nations come to get food, and Egypt is able to get rich off of this, selling the surrounding nations food. And eventually, Joseph's brothers come. And they don't recognize Joseph. I mean, it's been years and years and years since they've seen him. Joseph has changed a whole lot. I mean, he's second in command of all of Egypt now. That I think his brothers assumed he was dead. Most slaves don't have long lives. And Joseph arranges a little bit of trickery so that his brothers are now under his power. He can exact vengeance on his brothers. He can get even with his brothers. But that's not what happens. When we open up Genesis chapter 45, Joseph says to them, I am Joseph. Please come closer. I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset. Don't be angry with yourself for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. And then a couple of verses later he says, so it was God who sent me here and not you. He shows mercy on his brothers. And through all that happened to him, Joseph was able to see how God was present through all of it. God kept him safe when his brothers threw him in that cistern. God arranged for those slave traders to come and take him to exactly the right person in Egypt. God was with him in prison. God helped him reveal dreams to fellow prisoners. God helped that person we revealed the dream to remember him and tell Pharaoh about him. God put him in that position in Egypt, and God put him in that position to be with his brothers again. And he was actually able to then bring his whole family there to Egypt, and they were able to survive the famine because of the position that Joseph was in. I love the way Joseph saw God in all the hard times of his life. Yeah. I mean, I've got to tell you that we're going through some hard times right now, right? And some of our hardships are greater than others. Some of us are just like, yeah, my kids are driving me a little nuts. They're home from school all day and I'm going a little crazy. And some of us are home from work. Some of us are worried about jobs. Some of us own businesses and are worried about what those businesses are going to do. Some of us have a lot bigger hardships than others. You know, I just want to share with you, it's not really a secret. This isn't my first rodeo. These are not the first hard times I've ever had in my life. And I think almost all of us can say that. We've gone through hard time after hard time after hard time. And I've got to tell you, when I reflect back at some of the hard things that I've gone through in my life, I can see God at work in all of those situations. Now, that doesn't mean that God caused the hard times. God doesn't cause bad things. The Bible that we read is really clear about that. God does not cause bad things. God did not send the virus here to America or to anywhere on earth. God did not do that. God does not cause us to lose jobs. God does not cause us to lose businesses. No bad things come from God, only good. But the Bible's equally clear that God is with us all of the times. It describes God as someone who goes before us and behind us and surrounds us on all sides. God is always present. And God has amazing ways of being at work, even in hard times. We're not alone. The God who created the entire universe is with you during these hard times. He was with Joseph a few thousand years ago in Egypt, and he's with you right now. That's really amazing to think about. So here's my encouragement for you this week. First of all, remember that the God who made the entire universe is with you at all times, in good times and in hard times. That's really an encouraging thing to remember. Second of all, be at look for how God is working in these times. Who's being helped? Who do we have an opportunity to share Jesus with that we wouldn't have the opportunity to do otherwise? We get to spend extra time with our kids right now. God's at work in that. Our kids need us. They need our relationship. God is maybe knitting families together, communities together, workplaces together. He's at work. But here's the other thing. When I think of all the hard times that I've gone through in my life, I didn't always see God working. A lot of times I was just crying out, going, God, where are you? What are you doing? The Bible is full of Psalms where David says those same things to God. God, where are you? This stinks. I don't like it. Where are you? And, but just like Joseph, when he looked back at all those things, he could see God working. Here's a promise I have for you. When you look back 3, 6, 12 months later, you're going to look back and reflect and go, oh yeah, God was with me during those times. Maybe I couldn't see it at the time because I was stressed out and my vision just kind of gets foggy when those things happen. But you're going to be able to look back and you're able to see great things that God has done. And when he does that, my challenge to you is to share that with someone. When you realize that God was at work in your life, share that with your family, share that with your small group at Journeys Crossing, share that with people who aren't a part of Journeys Crossing, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. It's a part of your story that you could see God working. And there's a great thing about your story. No one can argue with you about it. It's your story. So in these hard times, I would challenge you to maybe read some of the story of Joseph. It starts in Genesis chapter 37. It goes for about 5-6 chapters or so. Read some of those things about Joseph and think about the similarities between Joseph's story and your story right now. The Bible's full of encouraging things like that, even people going through hardships. Let me pray for you before I go. God, I love you. We love you. And we know how great you are. You are more powerful, more creative, more awesome, more loving than anyone or anything we know. God, we believe what the Bible says, that you go before us and behind us, that you surround us with your love at all times. Help us to see your presence in these hard times. God, please act and bring us through these times, and then help us to praise you for what you've done. Let us not take credit for it, but let's give all the credit to you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Hey guys, I hope you have a great day. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.